Yep.
Welcome to DIY Homesteading at Missouri River Regional Library. I'm Angie, and this month we are going to do beeswax wraps. What is beeswax, you ask? It's in a lot of products. A lot of things you probably use every day, like lip balm or moisturizer, lotion. It's also an ancient way to help preserve food. Now, beeswax is secreted by bees, and it is the storage container of honey in the honeycomb. So the parts that hold the honey, that's the beeswax. Now, the ancient Egyptians used it. People have used it for millennium. What we do today is we create beeswax wraps out of cotton. So you want 100% cotton, and then we're going to put a beeswax mixture on them, and you can use them for a variety of things. Like here, I've simulated a sandwich. I could wrap up my sandwich in beeswax, just like a little gift. It'll stay fresh all day. If you have containers of leftover food in your refrigerator and you don't want to use plastic wrap or aluminum foil, you can use a beeswax wrap on that. It holds it. I wouldn't use this with meat or tomato-based things that it might touch. Tomato stuff will stain your beeswax wraps. If you have jars that you don't have lids for, throw a beeswax wrap on top of it. If it doesn't seal, you can always use a rubber band to seal it up. So how do we make beeswax wraps? Super simple. Like I said, you want 100% cotton fabric. You want to wash and dry this so that it does not shrink in the process. We are using a pinking shears, which is just a fancy scissors with these little teeth to cut around the edges of our fabric so that it doesn't ravel. You can make your beeswax wraps whatever size you want. I'm just using part of a fat quarter I have left over from another project, and I'm just going to cut around the edges to create a non-fraying edge so this will last. Because as we all know, cotton does fray, and we don't want that to happen to our beeswax wraps. So that's all you have to do to prepare your fabric. The rest of the recipe is beeswax pellets, or if you buy a beeswax bar, then you shred it up. Pine rosin. Pine rosin. It sometimes comes in chunks, so if it does, then you will want to make it into a powder. This, we've already done this on this one. We used a food processor. You can use a pestle and mortar. You can use a rolling pin, whatever you have to make it into a powdery substance. And then we are using jojoba oil to help make it more pliable. So that's it. You just need those 4 ingredients, really. Cotton, beeswax, rosin, jojoba oil. So we also need a few things to make this process work. We're going to use an iron today and an ironing board. However, that's not the only method you can use. You can use your oven if you'd like, but for this demonstration purpose, we're going to use an iron. We've covered our ironing board with a towel just to protect it and to add a little bit more padding. And then we're using parchment paper to protect our towel because we don't want wax on our nice bath towel. On our iron, we have set it to the cotton setting with no steam. You don't want any steam with this. You want it to be a dry iron. And we've covered it with aluminum foil just to protect the iron so that beeswax doesn't get on your iron. You could clean it off if it did, but who wants to do that when you don't have to? So we are going to lay our parchment paper out, lay our wrap on top of the parchment paper, and then we're going to create our mixture of beeswax, rosin, and jojoba oil. Now, how much you use depends on what size piece of fabric you have. So use this as a guide. So for about a 9 by 11 piece of fabric, which is this is a little bit bigger than that, but it's about the right size. We're going to use a tablespoon and a half of beeswax. So we're get our tablespoon and a half tablespoon, which we don't have, so we'll just eyeball it. Tablespoon and a half of beeswax wraps. Then we're going to use 1 teaspoon of the rosin. And then about 15 to 20 drops of jojoba oil. So most jojoba oils will come with a dropper system. So just kind of eyeball it. Do just a little bit more. I just want it enough that it will soak through the beeswax and the rosin. And we're going to stir that up. So that our oil is coating the rosin and it's not clumpy. Now the beeswax we're using is in pellets. So they are little bits of beeswax. They just come in little pellet forms. Like I said, beeswax does come in a bar as well that you can shred, which is like a cheese grater or a food processor or whatever you want to use. Okay, so we've got that all mixed up. And then what we're going to do is we're going to just pour it evenly onto our fabric. And you will just spread it out. Because when we iron this, we want it to go to all the edges. So just spread it out. And the nice thing about this project is if you decide you don't have enough beeswax on your fabric, you can always add more. It is not an exact science. It is dependent on how big your fabric is and how much stuff you have. Okay, so we're going to start in the middle of our fabric and we're going to iron outward. We want the beeswax to melt and cover the entire fabric. So we'll just keep ironing it until that happens. You can see that our beeswax is starting to melt. This isn't the fastest process. If you do this in the oven, you do it basically the same, except for you would put your fabric on a cookie sheet with your parchment paper, because you don't want beeswax all over your cookie sheet. And then you would put it in the oven, and every 5 minutes or so, you would take a paintbrush and you would paint the beeswax mixture to the edges of your fabric so it would completely cover it. So either way works. I am noticing that I do not have enough beeswax on this sheet of cotton. If we pull it up, you will see that I didn't have enough to go around to the edges. So we're going to add just a little bit more to our fabric so that we can cover the whole thing. Now, I have been using beeswax for a little bit, and I find that it is a great alternative to plastic wrap. You know, part of our process here at DIY Homesteading is to get rid of plastic, so to give you alternatives for plastic. And this is a great one because, you know, plastic wrap is just a disposable thing. You use it once and you throw it away. Whereas with the beeswax wraps, you can use them up to a year, maybe longer, depending on how much use they get. They're renewable, they're compostable. So when you're done with them and they don't really work anymore, you can just throw them in your compost pile or use them as a fire starter. If you go camping or have a fireplace or something, you could use them as a fire starter because they are covered in wax, which of course burns. But so they are good for the environment. They're a renewable resource. As long as the bees don't disappear, we will have beeswax available. And you can always refresh your beeswax wraps by setting them out in the sun or giving them a quick little iron. How do you clean them? You don't want to clean them like in a washing machine or a dishwasher or anything like that, because that will wash out all the beeswax, and that destroys our process here. So what you will do is wash them by hand in your sink with cold water. Don't use hot water. Hot water will melt the beeswax and it may take it off. But use cold water and just some dish soap. Mild dish soap is what I use. It's very easy. Like I said, they don't really take up the scent or the get stained from foods, but I did use some on leftover spaghetti one time, and the tomato mixture got onto the fabric and it did stain and it did smell a little bit. So I would just not recommend that, but I've used it to cover leftovers in the fridge. I've put, like you use half of an onion, and what are you going to do with the other half? You're going to put it in a Ziploc bag? Well, you could wrap it in beeswax wrap and save a little bit of plastic use. Okay, this is looking good. I've got beeswax going to all the edges of the fabric. Everything looks nice and melted. You can tell we're sticky. We're not coming apart here. And our parchment paper is a little wet with the oil and the wax. Oh, I do have a little section here that is not quite melted. Now, sometimes when you use lighter colored fabrics, the rosin will discolor it a little bit, which is why I used a dark fabric here. It's basically pine rosin, so it's the rosin from a pine tree, and it does discolor it slightly. Okay, so that looks great. Now, this is not ready to use. This is still very hot. I really don't want to be touching it because it's hot wax. Hot and it's moist. So we need to air dry this for a little while to get it to the right consistency. What is the right consistency? I have some here that I've used in the past. So this one has been well used. You can tell it's very pliable. It's not stiff like this one's going to be when it dries. And it will stick to things. Like this one is sticking to this glass dish. If you find that your beeswax wraps are not sticking anymore, the easiest way to fix that is to go like this. You just mush them up into a ball, maybe a couple times, and this activates the wax and makes it all pliable and sticky again. So then this one would be ready. Oops, landed on the scissors there, to stick on this jar. So there we go. Look at that. Seals it up nicely. You can stick that in the fridge. If you drop it, which I wouldn't recommend for a glass container, but it should stay. You shouldn't have any spillage or leakage at all. Store these in a drawer or your pantry, some kind of cabinet, a nice cool dry place. You can see this is nice and stiff, and once it dries, I will smush it all up into a ball and use it on something. Some food, probably leftover foods. All right, so thank you for joining us this month for DIY homesteading at Missouri River Regional Library. I hope you go home and make your own beeswax wrap and start using that instead of plastic wrap.